Welcome to Forgotten Forteana. On Midsummer's Eve 1936, a farmer of the Bocksten farm in the southwest of Sweden was gathering peat in a nearby bog together with his young son when the boys spotted something stuck to the harrow they were using. It turned out to be a small bag of bone pieces, which prompted the two to start digging into the bog with their hands. They soon found more bones, and they were clearly human. Upon finding this, the farmer sent another of his sons to get the country constable, and when the constable understood that they'd found the body, he in turn sent for the chief constable and the medical examiner from the nearby town. They quickly concluded that the body was old enough that it was the subject of archaeology rather than the law. The Bocksten man, as the remains have become known since, died sometime in the mid-1300s. On Midsummer Day morning, the head of the nearby Varberg Museum arrived along with various experts to transport the remains to the museum. The most striking thing they found was that the body was pierced by 3 sturdy stakes, 2 in and above the hip made out of birch, and an oak stake driven through the heart. In the decades since the find, the Bocksten man has been analyzed in practically every way you can imagine. He has become particularly known for his clothes, one of Europe's best preserved medieval outfits, but the question remains, why was this man buried face down in a bog and staked to the ground? Did whoever buried him believe he was a vampire? Or did they fear he might become one due to the way he died? At the time of the Bocksten man's death, it was widely believed that murder victims were at risk of rising from their graves to cause trouble for the living, a belief that in areas has persisted at least into the 20th century. If he was killed, his murderers may well have believed that he might return as a revenant, and taken precautions to prevent this. They would not have wanted to suffer persecution by their victim, or risk the possibility that the dead would reveal their crime. While it has always been a popular theory that the Bocksten man was a victim of murder, his cause of death has not been able to be determined for certain. Another possible reason for the Bocksten man's mode of burial could be that the local population believed him to have returned from the grave for some reason, which would almost certainly have caused him to dig up his corpse and rebury it in a more decisive manner. There were any number of reasons someone might rise from the dead. For example, thieves, witches, and murderers were at risk. Generally, anyone who was not deemed worthy to be buried in consecrated ground risked becoming one of the restless dead. Regardless of the exact cause of the Bocksten man's peculiar burial, whether it was because the locals believed they were terrorized by him in the form of a revenant, or for some reason feared that he might become one, or if he was buried in secret by his murderers who wanted to make sure he would not come back to haunt them, we can make educated guesses as to why he was buried in the exact manner that he was. Most obvious are the stakes. What better way to keep someone from rising than to physically stake them to the ground? This is a tradition that lives on to this day. Ask nearly anyone and they can tell you that to kill or at the very least incapacitate a vampire, you have to drive a stake through their heart. Being buried in an out-of-the-way place like a bog was another security measure. If the dead did rise, it was believed that he would be confused to find himself in a place he did not know, and hopefully would wander aimlessly until the rising sun forced him back to his grave. The Bocksten man was also buried face down. It was believed that a revenant that awoke in their grave would start digging to get out, but if they were buried facing down, they would instead just dig themselves deeper into the earth. Finally, it might not have been a coincidence that the bog was chosen as the Bocksten man's final resting place. In some areas, it was an accepted practice to sink the bodies of the suspected undead in bodies of water. The belief was that while the earth could not contain them, the water would. Remember, for example, that in Dracula, everyone's favorite count cannot cross running water. Shortly after the Bocksten man was found, the local story said to trace back to the time of the man's death started circulating in the area. It was said that the man was an outsider who had come to recruit local men to go to war. The locals did not like this in the least, and summarily killed the man and buried him in a bog. This, however, was the start of fearful hauntings in the area, and all the local dogs would gather around the burial site to howl endlessly. The locals finally reopened the grave and drove stakes through the corpse, which put an end to the haunting. We'll probably never know if there is any truth to the story, or if it is as old as some claim. But even today, some claim that the bog is haunted, and that you can hear screams of ghosts or demons among the trees.